The boardroom air turned heavy, papers still fluttering from the slap of rejection. Emily's heart pounded as every eye pierced through her silence. Then came his smirk, the whisper cutting through her chest, "You're too weak." In that instant, shame burned into fire, and fire into unshakable resolve. Before that cruel moment in the boardroom, Emily's life was humble yet filled with quiet ambition. Each morning, she walked to work in worn-out shoes, clutching notebooks overflowing with dreams. She wasn't driven by wealth or titles, but by hope and unshakable belief that ideas could change lives. While others measured worth in appearances, Emily's vision stretched far beyond her tiny apartment walls. She carried no luxury, yet carried something greater, the courage to imagine a different future. He sat at the head of the table like a king, his expensive suit gleaming under the boardroom lights. Every gesture, every word dripped with authority. To the world, he was a visionary leader. To Emily, he was a wall, one she kept crashing into, day after day. He never saw her as a thinker, never as a builder. To him, she was just a fragile assistant, someone meant to carry papers, not ideas. His sharp glances sliced through her whenever she dared to speak, his sarcastic smiles silencing her before she even finished a sentence. Each rejection became routine, a cruel reminder of the invisible ceiling above her. And yet, beneath the weight of his dismissal, Emily's mind refused to stop. The boss believed he was breaking her confidence. In truth, he was sharpening her hunger, fueling the fire that would one day consume his throne. The office became a stage, and Emily, the unwilling performer, whenever she stood to present, her voice would waver not from lack of knowledge, but from the weight of all the eyes waiting for her to fail. The first stumble brought smirks. The second, quiet chuckles. By the third, laughter filled the room. Her boss never stopped it. He fueled it, leaning back in his chair, amused, as if to say, "Know your place." Each mocking laugh cut deeper than words. They wanted her to shrink, to remain small and unseen. And for a moment, she almost believed them. But what they didn't see was what those humiliations were building inside her. Every insult was a stone added to the foundation of her will. Though her spirit bent under the weight, it never broke. In silence, Emily's resolve grew sharper, waiting for the day she would no longer be their joke at home. Far from the polished office walls, Emily's world was stripped to raw survival. Her small kitchen table groaned under stacks of unpaid bills: electricity, rent, medical notes she had no way of covering. Each envelope felt like a verdict, heavier than the last dot nights offered no rest. Hunger clawed at her stomach as she quietly pushed her portion toward her younger sister, pretending she wasn't hungry. She would lie awake in the dark, staring at the cracked ceiling, the silence pierced only by the echo of his words, "Weak." That single word followed her everywhere: the bus ride home, the grocery store she couldn't afford, the mirror where tired eyes stared back. It was more than an insult. It was a brand burned into her spirit. But beneath the ache, something stirred. She had known struggle before, and every storm had taught her endurance. Poverty pressed down like chains, but it also forged iron in her veins. She realized survival itself was proof of strength. Weak. No, in that silence, she whispered to herself, "One day, I'll turn this pain into power." It happened on a night she almost didn't stay late. The office was nearly empty, the glow of desk lamps flickering across abandoned paperwork. Emily lingered, finishing tasks no one else cared to do. Then she heard her boss's laughter drifting from his corner office, low and confident. He wasn't talking to her this time, but to a group of visiting executives. Women can't handle pressure. They crack. That's why they'll never lead. The words froze her. She stood in the hallway, invisible, yet each syllable pierced her chest. She thought of the bills stacked on her kitchen table, of the nights she had gone hungry, of every humiliating laugh she had endured. Pressure. She had lived inside it her entire life. In that moment, something inside her snapped, not in despair, but in awakening. She realized she didn't just need recognition from men like him. She didn't even want his approval anymore. What she needed was independence, the freedom to never bow to his arrogance again. That insult meant to crush her, planted a seed instead. A seed of rebellion, of creation. One day, she promised herself she would build something of her own, something no one could take away. The decision didn't come easily. For weeks, Emily carried the resignation letter folded inside her bag, the paper worn thin from her shaking hands. Fear gnawed at her fear. Of hunger, of failure, of stepping into a world with no safety net. But the echo of his words, "Women can't handle pressure," burned louder than fear. One morning, she finally placed the letter on his polished desk. Her boss leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming with arrogance. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then he laughed, sharp, dismissive, cruel. "You'll be back within a month. You're too weak to survive without me." The words stung, but this time they didn't bury her. They fueled her. With trembling legs but a steady gaze, Emily turned and walked out of that office. No savings, no wealthy family, to fall back on just an idea scribbled in a notebook, and a fire raging in her chest. Colleagues whispered she was throwing her life away. The city streets felt colder than ever as she stepped into the unknown. But for the first time, she wasn't walking under his shadow. She was walking toward her own light, determined to prove his laughter wrong. Emily's apartment, once a quiet refuge, transformed into the battlefield of her dreams. The kitchen table that once held unpaid bills now groaned under piles of notebooks, scraps of paper, and second-hand laptops she had begged and borrowed to piece together. Cold coffee sat untouched beside her, the taste of exhaustion lingering on her lips. While the city outside drifted into sleep, her world came alive. She taught herself everything: marketing, coding, design skills no boss ever thought she was capable of mastering. Tutorials played softly in the background, her pen scratching notes at a furious pace. The clock hands spun past midnight, then 2, then 4. But Emily's determination burned brighter than the neon signs outside her window. Her body begged for rest, but her mind refused. She was building brick by brick, with nothing but sheer willpower as her cement. Each sleepless night felt like a sacrifice, a piece of her comfort, her health, her ease. Yet she embraced it, because every keystroke, every new concept understood, pulled her closer to freedom. This was the pressure her boss claimed she could never handle. But in the silence of those nights, Emily wasn't breaking. She was sharpening herself into someone unstoppable. Weeks of sleepless nights finally took shape in the form of her first product. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was hers. Emily launched it with trembling hands, refreshing the sales page every hour, heart pounding with anticipation. The numbers barely moved. A handful of orders trickled in, far less than she had prayed for. To anyone else, it might have looked like failure. But then came the message. A stranger wrote, "This changed my life. Thank you for creating this." Emily stared at the screen, tears blurring her vision. It wasn't about the money, it was proof. Proof that her work mattered, that her ideas could reach someone beyond her tiny apartment walls. For the first time, the echo of her boss's voice didn't feel louder than her own. His cruel smirk, his laughter, his cutting words, they all faded against the glow of that single thank you. It was a small win, but to Emily, it felt like gold. The world hadn't opened its arms yet, but it had cracked the door, and that sliver of light was enough to remind her she was no longer just surviving. She was building something real, something unstoppable. For the first time, Emily felt momentum on her side. Investors who once ignored her now filled her inbox, curious about the woman building something from nothing. Hope flickered brighter than ever until betrayal struck. Her most trusted supplier vanished overnight, leaving orders unfilled, customers angry, and her reputation hanging by a thread. One broken promise unraveled everything. Debts crashed down like a storm she couldn't outrun. Drowning her faster than she could catch her breath, the whispers returned, colder this time. Familiar in their cruelty, "She's too weak." Words she had fought so hard to silence now echoed everywhere in boardrooms, in her inbox, even in the pitying glances of friends. And then came the sharpest blow, her old boss. Smirking, he told colleagues he had predicted this all along. His laughter traveled farther than any praise ever had. Emily sat in the dim light of her apartment, invoices scattered around her like shards of broken glass. The silence pressed heavy, threatening to crush her. For a fleeting moment, she questioned it all. Maybe he was right. Maybe she wasn't strong enough, but buried beneath the wreckage. A stubborn ember refused to die. Here's single quotes as the 200-word script for outline. 11 that keeps full continuity with your previous outlines. Written in human, cinematic and emotional storytelling language, the apartment was quiet. To quiet no hum of the fridge, no soft glow of the lamp, Emily sat on the floor, her back pressed against the wall, clutching an unpaid electricity bill in trembling hands. The numbers on the page blurred as fresh tears slid down her cheeks. This was her reality now: cold dinners, dark rooms, and silence that seemed to mock every dream she once carried. For the first time, she let herself break. Her sobs echoed in the emptiness, raw and unrestrained. The girl who once dared to dream of freedom felt small again, cornered by life, by debt. The world had labeled her weak, and tonight, even she almost believed it. But as she stared at that piece of paper, a spark ignited. Through the tears, a vow slipped from her lips, whispered like a promise to herself: "If they think I'm weak, I'll show them what strength really is." It was her lowest point, the moment everything could have ended. Yet in that darkness, something unyielding was born. Strength not from applause, not from success, but from survival. Emily didn't know how she'd rise yet, only that she would. Emily rose from the ashes, not with noise, but with quiet determination. This time, she refused the shortcuts, the too-good promises, the easy paths that had once betrayed her. Instead, she studied harder, asked sharper questions, built stronger foundations. Every mistake from her past became a blueprint for the future. Her tiny apartment, once littered with unpaid bills, now buzzed with renewed energy. Nights were still long, but they were no longer filled with despair. They were filled with plans, calculations, designs. Each failure she had endured became fuel for a smarter, tougher version of herself. Slowly, her products began to turn heads, not with flashy launches, but with undeniable quality. A whisper of her name began to circulate in boardrooms that had once dismissed her, executives leaning forward at the sound of Emily as if she were no longer invisible. Every small win felt like a hammer blow against that single word that had haunted her for years weak, and with each strike, her spirit grew bolder, her resolve sharper. She was no longer trying to prove herself to her boss or her colleagues. She was building something greater, a legacy born from resilience. The boardroom looked exactly as it had years ago: same polished table, same cold walls, same echo of judgment that once crushed her spirit. But this time, Emily did not walk in with trembling hands or worn-out shoes. She entered with quiet power, her presence commanding the room before she even spoke. She was no longer the timid assistant dismissed as fragile. She was Emily Carter, Millionaire CEO, the name whispered in every major boardroom across the city. The room that once felt suffocating now seemed small in comparison to her vision. At the head of the table sat the man who had once smirked and whispered, "You're too weak." His suit was still expensive, his demeanor still proud, but his eyes betrayed something new fear. When he stood and extended his hand, it trembled slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the empire she had built. Emily didn't need to gloat, nor did she need to speak. Her silence carried more weight than 1,000 words. She looked at him with calm, unflinching eyes, the power dynamic reversed forever. Her success was the answer. The girl he mocked had become the woman who conquered. The boardroom fades away, leaving only Emily steady, unbroken, unafraid. Her eyes lock on the camera, carrying the weight of every tear turned into strength. "Strength," she whispers, her voice calm but unshakable, "isn't what they say you lack. Strength is what you build when the world doubts you." The words are not advice. They are lived truth, proof carved from hunger, rejection, and silence that became victory. She leans closer, her gaze softening. "If my story reached you, then remember yours is still being written, and it might be the next one we tell." The screen lingers, her eyes a final promise. Then, darkness.